Hi everyone, and welcome to the Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain Europe Red Sofa. Very pleased to be joined here by Nadine Philipp, who's Vice President for Sustainability in the Supplier Network at BMW Group. Nadine has just delivered a keynote here on BMW's supply chain decarbonisation strategy. So thank you very much for your input. I wanted to start here by sharing a little bit more for our audience about why the supply chain is such a crucial factor for BMW in its decarbonisation strategy.
If you look at decarbonisation of automotive value chains, of course, the first thought you have is the decarbonisation of the actual fleet of the product. And that's also what we do. So we increase our battery electric vehicle share. But that's only one point of the decarbonisation story, because if you produce more and more electric vehicles, the footprint actually in the supply chain increases a lot. This is down to the fact that we have a lot of CO2 intense processes, like high voltage battery production, or also a lot more raw materials we need, which are CO2 intense, and thus drives the supply chain footprint really up in the air. And this is where we have to look at that and have a clear strategy also for decarbonizing the supply chain.
So it's an important point. The actual pivot to electrification means the factor that the role that supply chain plays in overall CO2 emission is growing. So what would be some of the important levers? You mentioned the battery supply chain. What are the important levers that you're looking to address in decarbonizing the supply chain?
So when we look at the supply chain, we have to look at our future electric vehicles, or already on the street driving vehicles. We see in an electric vehicle mainly the high voltage batteries with the battery raw material, as just mentioned, but also aluminium and steel. So all those raw materials make up for 2/3 of the CO2 emissions in the supply chain. And this is where we put our focus on. And in order to decarbonize the processes that lie behind those raw material extractions and processing, we look at green power deployment. That's the main lever, roughly 50%. Then we have secondary raw material, so we deploy and increase the quota of secondary raw materials. That saves CO2, and of course also optimization and production processes, or really looking at less CO2 intense materials.
I wanted to pick up on the point of secondary materials and how that might feed into the circular supply chain and circular economy. What's the approach that BMW is taking to increase its circular supply chain?
So circular economy is definitely a focus topic also for us at BMW, and we clearly see the benefit. I think the topic itself has to evolve and has to be enabled way more when we look at topics like end of life, closing the loop, etc. Because in the end, the cars that are driving on the street today with the high voltage batteries are our raw material sources of the future. And I think there has to happen a lot, and this is also why we at BMW have also a clear strategy for circular economy, and we are looking at it from all the angles. What measures can we deploy in development of our cars, thinking already design for circularity, oversourcing secondary raw materials, up to the end where we're thinking about collecting end-of-life material and put it back into the circle.
Of course, that can be an important resilience factor as well. We talk a lot about material shortages or challenges in the future. This will be an important part of your resilience as well.
Absolutely. So it feeds in, it makes us less dependent on primary raw materials and also on certain regions in the world, of course.
When we look at the overall supply chain, another important factor is to understand the role that logistics is also playing in, logistics and packaging is playing in overall emissions. It's clear it's not one of the big levers or big areas that you've addressed, but nonetheless important. How are you focusing on this together with the logistics department, and what's the overall impact that you see that you need to address in this area?
If you look at the supply chain emissions, it's a one-digit percentage what the impact of the logistics is, but nevertheless, it's of course as well important. Especially when we look into the future where we are going on our path to net zero, we have to take all the measures. We can substantially reduce CO2, and of course logistics plays also a role there, and we have a whole team actually working on that topic also with our logistic providers, where we're looking at things like recycled material in packaging, optimizing the logistics routes, etc., to save CO2, but also alternative drivetrains and alternative fuels in order to decarbonize.
So still, I would say, an important focus both to optimize and look at new opportunities in technology.
Absolutely.
Right now, it's fair to say that there's some uncertainty in the political landscape in terms of regulations. When you look to this framework, what would be your wish? What would be your wish to regulators in Europe and beyond to help you meet and achieve these goals?
So I think the goals, especially when we're looking into the EU, they are goals we would all subscribe and we would all say they are the right goals. I think what's needed to be done is harmonization of all those legislations. So we have a lot of different approaches, for example, 3 different CO2 calculations, so harmonization is key. And yes, we do need a strong framework in order to standardize also the methodology behind CO2, for example. So I think that's the biggest thing we could wish for, is the harmonization and the clear setting of frameworks.
So Nadine, my last question. It's clear that although there's optimization opportunities and one can save some costs with sustainability, it is also an investment and in many cases will be a cost. And we're in challenging times and companies may not always have the priority or the money set aside for these initiatives. How does BMW approach it from that point of view, and why does it remain such an important factor even in these challenging times?
Yeah, good question. But we strongly believe that it is business critical to be sustainable and have all the procedures in place. So it is also a success factor for the future. And we as a premium car manufacturer also see it as our responsibility, what we have to provide not only to customers but also to the society. And this is maybe one important aspect. It's not only the topic of ecological but also social, and that has to be balanced out with the economics, which are also important for a company. And for us, the really clear and long-term strategy that guides us through the sustainability approaches, that is actually key, and this is where you stick to.
Absolutely. So keeping that long-term view and compass, as you put it earlier on stage, is going to remain critical. Nadine, thank you so much for sharing this information, these insights, the data with our audience. Please check out more at Automotive Logistics. We'll be sharing some more of the information that Nadine shared on BMW's sustainability strategy, and a lot more on the topic across our event here at Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain Europe. Thanks again, Nadine, for being with us.
Thanks, Chris. My pleasure.